Okay, I'm David Gerard. I'm author of the book Attack of the 50-Foot Blockchain, a book about Bitcoin and smart contracts and all that sort of thing. It came out last year. I started as a music journalist. I moved into IT because it makes more money. I started following Bitcoin in 2011 because I'd heard about this thing where people could get rich with no effort. And whenever anyone says that, they're probably wrong. So it caught my interest. And I've been following it sort of since. And I started writing a book about it in late 2016 when nobody really cared. And then it came out just in time for the big Bitcoin bubble of 2017. So that's attracted a bit of attention. Right. Now, every time I do one of these talks, people ask, what actually is a blockchain? Because they don't know. So they always think someone else knows. So we're going to talk about what the thing actually is, because that's useful and important to know. Because you'll see it's really simple, and you'll wonder why people say these magical things about it. We'll talk about Bitcoin, which is sort of tangential to what you're probably thinking about, blockchain for the enterprise. But you need to know about it because it's where all the weird stuff comes from. And then we'll go through some more details of blockchain business and how this actually works. Okay, what on earth is a blockchain, actually? So let's start with, we have a simple accounting ledger. So you have money going from someone to someone else on a given date, a certain amount. You just want a list of all the transactions. So you got this list, and that's fine. You want to copy it round. How can you make sure there aren't errors or people fiddling with it? So the usual answer to this question is, like, you add a check digit. Like, that's a sample credit card number. That's a sample Visa card test number. The one on the end is not part of the number. It's actually a check digit calculated from the other digits. So if you enter a card number and that's wrong, say if you swap digits or something, then it'll add up wrong and they'll say, oh no, that's not a valid card, try again. So this is really useful and it's widely used. There's a bigger version of check digits that's commonly used in computing, hashes. So with a hash, it's like a checksum, but you can take any data, you put it into this really simple formula, and it calculates a hash of it, which is a long string of gibberish like that. If you ever see this sort of long string of gibberish letters and numbers, it's probably the hash of something. So the key thing about hashes is, if two lumps of data come to the same hash, it's probably the same data, almost certainly. It's really easy to go from data to the hash, but it's almost impossible to reverse it. You can't fake the hash of something. That's really useful as a characteristic. So this is why if you get two hashes the same, then the data that went in is the same, and that data is verified as being the same. We'll get to hashes later because those come up a lot. So let's get our simple ledger and let's add hashes to each of the entries. So that way, if we get a typo wrong, like if we put in 13 January 2090 instead of 2009, the hash would be wrong and we know immediately. So the problem with this is it doesn't protect against adding new records that are bogus or removing a record. So what do we do for that? Let's hash all the hashes. So you get the whole ledger. Instead of doing a hash of the whole ledger each time you add a row, that'll be really slow. If you have 1,000 records, you add another record to it, you don't want to recalculate the whole thing, you just recalculate the hashes. Now that's really useful in computer science terms. That does mathematically guarantee that the thing is the same, and the same hash guarantees apply. So basically, if that's the hash of the hashes, then you know the whole block is valid. So that's really good. So we have a completely validated record. If anyone alters it, we know immediately it's tamper evident. So if we had a bunch of blocks of transactions, we could chain the blocks. And that gives us a hash of the whole chain at the end. That's called a blockchain. That's where the name comes from. So you have this ledger. It's a tamper evident, append only ledger. You can quickly verify your copy but it would be almost impossible to fake it. And if someone tries twiddling a number, you can really quickly check it and go, oh, you fiddled with that. Now, that's a really useful construct, and it's really old. It was not new with Bitcoin, with blockchains for business or whatever. It's 40 years old. So you can see this thing. It's a simple, elegant idea. It's obviously got a bunch of uses, but it's not magical. You have all these amazing promises of what blockchain will do. And this is actually the thing that is at the heart of it. Where did all the magical promises come from? They came from Bitcoin. So this is going to seem like a diversion because we're talking about blockchain for enterprise rather than cryptocurrencies, but you do need to know this because this is where all the weird stuff comes from. All the fabulous promises that seem a bit too good to be true. So why did Bitcoin exist? Now, Bitcoin was asking a question that was the right sort of question. Like, digital cash is obviously useful. If I owe you 10 quid, I could hand you a £10 note, but how could I do that electronically? Doing it via PayPal is fiddly, and they might charge you through your bank's fiddly, and so on. So let's invent a digital cash. We could use this hard-to-fake, tamper-evident ledger for our new digital cash. It's like an account book that you can only add new lines to, and you can't cross out old ones. So who gets to determine when you add an entry? So the obvious answer is you do it through your bank. Like, that's the version of digital cash we have now, where you have your card, you put it on a card reader, and it takes your money, you know. But the problem with that was Bitcoin's founders had very particular requirements, because Bitcoin was not founded as a payment system. It was founded as a political project to make special internet money that would work a certain way. A particular extreme libertarian position, like not just let's have less regulation, but let's have no regulation, no authorities, nothing whatsoever. Just people independently trading something that would be money under that circumstance. These people are, some are quite nice and quite sincere. They just have odd views on how they think economics should work. They also like a completely rigid gold standard. And they also think credit is bad and evil. So you should use the actual gold as money. You know, even banknotes are pushing it a bit far. This turns out not to be what people are actually interested in that much. So what they were promised all sorts of things, and these are part of the odd Bitcoin ideology. Decentralized and trustless, fast and free. It's uncensorable and irreversible. There's no just printing money because there's only 21 million Bitcoins, and it'll totally destroy banks and governments because they're evil. Like, they actually promised that. You should look at those first three promises. Though you'll have seen those promises being made about blockchains. So Bitcoin didn't actually succeed at its project. It started in late 2008, early 2009. It had basically re-centralized by early 2014. The process of Bitcoin mining has economies of scale. So the original idea was that anyone could make Bitcoins at home on their computer, but it's centralized into like 3 or 4 big pools. One company makes 80% of all the Bitcoin mining chips, and it uses a stupid amount of electricity. Like 0.1 to 0.5%, the numbers are hard to estimate, but it's about that, of all the electricity in the world. And that's to run the world's most inefficient payment system. But they keep at it because they could get some money from mining Bitcoin. So it crashed yesterday some more, so they're not getting quite as much. Now, some of the other promises turn out to be not all that. Like the claim that it's uncensorable and irreversible. Well, that's true. Every transaction is final. So the threat model there was that no one can come in and take your money, like banks or governments or whatever. This turns out not to be what users want. People really like reversibility. They like having chargebacks. It makes them more confident as consumers. All fraud and theft is final. If I hack your computer, I pick your pocket of your Bitcoins from around the world, they're mine now. And mistakes happen all the time. One mistake, you've lost your coins. You're digging through a rubbish dump in Wales looking for the hard drive you put those Bitcoins on. So it's not that great. And the promise of the super hard money was you can't just print Bitcoins, but anyone can copy the code. So, because it's just software. And so immediately people made their own magical internet money, because the real promise of Bitcoin was, if I do this thing, I might get rich for free. So Bitcoin it's not really digital gold. The economics doesn't really make sense, and it failed at its promises pretty much. So by about late 2013 or early 2014, the shine had come off Bitcoin a bit. So what did the Bitcoin fans do? They thought, well, maybe we can take the blockchain structure and market it to enterprise, because we like it. We think it's really cool and can do all sorts of things. So they did. So what's the pitch for that? Now, you have an organization, in your case, a business, any organization of any sort has bureaucracy. How can they make the bureaucracy work better? How can they get more done with less people? That's the eternal question. So the promise is, we can make this work better with a blockchain. So what they did was they marketed it to businesses as blockchain technology. This was a euphemism for Bitcoin. Always remember that. You can say technically that distributed ledger technology is different from blockchain, which is different from Bitcoin, but they're all still in the same sphere of things. And, you know, they both started as euphemisms of Bitcoin. I think the earliest I could find a distributed ledger was 2013, and it was talking about Bitcoin. Like, it's not technology regarding ledgers that are distributed. It's specifically a euphemism for Bitcoin. It's not even a particular technology in a lot of cases. You see things marketed as blockchain that aren't actually even a blockchain, really. They're just the ledger from 1979. What it is a particular collection of marketing promises and magical promotional words that they say to try to sell you and get you to buy this from them. So here are the promises. They're literally the Bitcoin promises, okay, with the buzzword changed to blockchain. Decentralized, fast and free. They never say who you're decentralizing against. Also, in a lot of cases, these systems really are completely centrally controlled. Pretty much all ICO smart contracts, where they think we'll put water or electricity or photographers on the blockchain and it'll be decentralized. Well, no, it won't, because they run the contract. They administer, and smart contract just means computer program. Uncensorable, irreversible, immutable, and incorruptible. So if I could see you, I'd ask you to put your hands up. Anyone who's had to deal with GDPR issues, and that'll be everyone here, including me. And you don't actually want an irreversible database for that, really. So the magical buzzword is smart contracts. Now, that's a really cool promotional term. It's a contract, so it's legal and enforceable, but it's smart. That sounds really good, but it literally just means computer program. Like, I've seen things like ICO promotional white papers where they have a bunch of users on one side, they have a bunch of wonderful results on the other side, and in the middle is literally a large box that says smart contracts. These are actual promises from one large vendor, who I won't name, but you can have a look for these quotes if you want. Enterprise class, cross-industry, open standard for distributed ledgers that can transform the way business transactions are conducted globally. Highly secure blockchain services and frameworks that address regulatory compliance across financial services, government, and healthcare. Those promises were from 2016. They're still not true in 2018. They're both is statements about things that actually exist now, but they're really could statements about things that don't exist yet. And whenever you hear the term blockchain could or blockchain potentially, you must remember that means blockchain doesn't. And, you know, future potential is important, but they want your money now. So when they will often sell you things that literally don't exist yet, like individual patient control over their health data with no other human intervention. That doesn't exist yet, unless your grandmother going to the GP is really good at administering her GPG private keys on her encryption, which she probably isn't. She might well be, but she probably isn't. They are long on promises. Keep saying to yourself, if it sounds too good to be true, it is. Now, here's some real-world uses. There are almost no blockchains in production use anywhere. It's coming on to 10 years now. One prominent case is the World Food Program. This is actually really good, by the way. It's an excellent program that does good work. It feeds refugees. They've got a program running in Jordan, actually. So what they do is they have these refugees. They're normal people. They've been dispossessed of their homes. What do? Well, you just support them for a while. You give them money to live on. They put this new program into place, and they achieved 98% cost savings on overheads. Their overheads are now 2% of what they were, on top of the money they hand out. And they've been telling everyone, you'll see this as a promotional example for how good Ethereum is, how good a blockchain is. There was a book, The Truth Machine by Paul Vigna, which uses this as its first chapter example. The thing is that Ethereum didn't do the job. They saved all the money by taking the disbursement of funds in-house, just doing it themselves instead of doing it through vendors. And the actual Ethereum, it's literally, they're the only user of it. So it's just one user of this data store, and it's functionally just a database. It's a good program, and it should definitely be supported, and it does great work, but it's not a reason to use blockchain. So you'll see a lot of press releases in all the financial papers and business sections about such and such an industry is going blockchain any moment. And the majority of these are IBM trying to sell you a blockchain. And if you track down the original press release, you'll often find the thing doesn't actually exist yet. And again, could has been turned into an is by the time it reaches the print. So beware of that. If you see something that sounds amazing and would turn the world upside down if it were true, it's probably not true. IBM will fund a lot of pilot programs, desperately trying to get a win. Their last two, the Walmart supply chain trial, got in the papers a lot in the last couple of months. Maersk, which is the world's biggest shipping company, has done one with IBM as well. These are blockchain-ish at the back, but functionally they're a centralized system that Walmart runs and tells its vendors to use. And Maersk runs and tells its vendors to use. So, yeah, it's actually completely centralized. All the computers live on the IBM cloud. Maybe having a blockchain backend is the right answer, but that's an IT question, not a blockchains will revolutionize the world question. You will get people trying to sell you blockchain-based systems. Here are the questions to ask them. 1, are they mixing up might and is, could and is? Are they mixing up the future with the present of things that actually exist? Because they want your money now. Does their software do all the things they said? All the coulds and potentialities need to be real. 2, will the system scale up to the size of your data? Like, I've seen a lot of claims of blockchain will revolutionize this industry where they have like the blockchain would have to grow like gigabytes an hour or something. It totally doesn't scale, and this is really common. They don't seem to understand scaling. Bitcoin is a great example. It was a marvelous system until it failed to scale, and then it was slow and transactions took ages and it was terrible. If you have an immutable blockchain where you can't change things, how do you deal with human error? How do you fix mistakes? Mistakes happen. If you have a smart contract, it's really hard to alter it. The original idea of smart contracts, they were completely unalterable. Then people realized that was actually sort of dumb. But how do you fix problems? 4, trustlessness. This is often a big marketing thing. You can form a consortium where you don't trust each other, but you can work together. So we've done that for centuries before blockchains existed. The blockchain doesn't bring anything to the party here. In any consortium type system I've seen, the blockchainy thing is just a way of administering the bureaucracy, but it's literally just doing stuff that people know how to do already. And if there's any serious dispute, it's going to go to court. Anyway, what is your threat model? Why do you need a blockchain for this job? And if you're working with people you can already trust, why are you using a blockchain? Then the fundamental question is, what does this get you that a centralized database can't? Because as a database, it is less efficient than any other existing database, right? It's very robust. Maybe that's what you want. That's an IT decision with a bit of thought. Now, this issue will be dear to the hearts of market researchers, GDPR. Now, GDPR, like, it's the regulation, right? It's a regulatory environment. We just deal with it. So I do this. I also work as a system administrator, and I have to clean up GDPR problems. GDPR basically requires that anything that constitutes a collection of personal data, very broadly defined, has to be redactable. You have to be able to delete entries, change entries, correct entries. You cannot have it in an immutable database. Nothing that is personal data or looks even slightly like personal data should be put into anything blockchainy or into any sort of Merkle tree type ledger at all, ever. I have seen blockchain for marketing promotional pitches claim that using a blockchain will help you comply with the GDPR. And that's just completely wrong. That's just literally the opposite of what it does. I would look into such claims with a very acerbic eye and some technical people to hand. So a common method, which is commonly advocated, is we'll take the personal data and we'll just store a hash of it, because you can't reverse hashes, right? You take David Gerard, author of the book Attack of the 50-Foot Blockchain at 123 Smith Street. You've hashed that and you end up with a string of gibberish. You can't get my address out of that. But there is one way you can, and that's to find someone else's listed hashes and what their originals were. Because this is actually a commercial service that some lower bottom of the barrel companies will sell, decrypting hashes. So hashes may count as personal data under the GDPR as well. I wouldn't let them anywhere near a blockchain system. So, issues to consider. Magic doesn't happen. If you see something that's remarkable, would turn the world upside down and is terribly exciting, it's probably wrong. It might be true, in which case good, but it probably isn't. Never put personal data into a blockchain, even hashed ones, not within a mile. Keep that on a completely separate database that is not a blockchain. And let me say yet again, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. So, I'm David Gerard, author of Attack of the 50-Foot Blockchain, which is the book there. That's my webpage and my Twitter, which I'm on about 16 hours a day. And you should feel free to email me afterwards if you think of a question later. And I'm highly contactable and I delight in people's questions. So do check out the book. It's on Amazon. There's a nice paperback. There's an ebook, and it's marvelous. I'm quite proud of it. It came out about a year ago, but it still covers the issue. And for the stuff that's happened since then, I have the blog, which you have the address there. So thank you very much.
Thank you, David. That was excellent. And I have to say, I have got a copy of the book on my Kindle, and I found it useful and a quick and easy read, which is always something I'm looking for these days. Perhaps I've always been looking for quick, easy reads. So we've got a couple of questions, but before we go to those, and whilst other people type their questions in, just a couple of points of clarification. You referred to an ICO, but I don't think you actually said what one was, David.
Oh, ICOs, yes. Initial coin offerings. these are things where someone promotes. The cynical view is they're promoting magic beans. They'll sell you tokens and say that if you buy the tokens, they imply you'll get rich from them later as an investment. And the tokens will be used to solve some impossible problem that is a problem right now, or maybe a problem. Like Kodak Coin says that they'll solve stock photo sites by selling a special currency, Kodak coins, which they'll pay photographers in, and it'll all be excellent. And by the way, it's got a blockchain in there somewhere. Or what was another one? DentaCoin. We'll pay dentists in our special private currency. Now, the point of these is questionable, and certainly recently in the US, the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, has been cracking down on these badly and saying, no, you're selling securities and you need to do all the legal stuff. And this has turned out to be quite difficult. So, yeah, if you see someone promoting a fabulous new ICO in the world of crypto with blockchain magic attached, I would suggest keeping away from them for the most part.
And you mentioned Ethereum, which of course is a cryptocurrency, but it's more than that. So if you just give us like a quick sketch of what Ethereum is.
Right. Well, Ethereum it's a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, you know, a digital money that runs independently. But they had another idea of it, which is we'll run smart contracts on the blockchain. So we'll have little programs. The analogy they used was Bitcoin's like a spreadsheet, then Ethereum is like a spreadsheet with macros. So they thought this idea of running programs that would execute when you did things on the blockchain was really cool. And they ended up with this whole industry of smart contract systems. And it turns out the majority of smart contract systems were used to write questionable ICO offers, which wasn't great. So Ethereum is a really technically interesting system if you're into that sort of thing, but it's got scaling problems. They know it's got scaling problems. They're working very hard to fix them, but I don't know if the fixes are feasible. So I wouldn't count on it unless and until they release them. And the ICO industry has spawned off Ethereum, and it's just been terrible. And certainly in the recent cryptocurrency bubble, a lot of people got skinned really badly. So yeah, there's been a lot of bad fallout from all that.
We've got a question here. Does this suggest the use for marketing research purposes is unlikely for blockchain?
Well, I know a lot of people are selling market research products that are based on blockchains, but it's hard to see the applicability of them. Because however, you have the first issue, which is however you slice it, this is going to be personal data. It turns out that even somewhat anonymized data that is about people's personal preferences, it forms a fingerprint of them. You can really decode stuff really easily. I know there are products that claim that they will sanitize personal data and it will be suddenly usable as if it was personal data, but it won't have the person attached. I'm not sure these would pass GDPR muster in a crunch. I mean, at that point, it's ask your lawyer. But, you know, you shouldn't have to do that after you've bought a product. But you're putting yourself at risk, not them selling it to you. It's a tricky one. At this point, we get out of my ambit because I am not a lawyer and I'm not your lawyer, but that's the sort of thing you'd have to think about. And I'd be reluctant to trust any products that promises data laundering because it's not clear that there is such a thing. You're dealing with people's data and putting it in an immutable database is bad, and spreading it about willy-nilly thinking it's laundered is probably bad, and so on.
Is one of the issues that we're facing perhaps that blockchain is new and useful, but the things that are new are not useful and things that are useful are not new? So when people talk about creating a permissioned database with the ability to edit previous data, it might well be a good system, but it's not blockchain.
Yeah, that's pretty much the case. I mean, I've seen some blockchain is a buzzword. It's a promotional buzzword that is a particular set of promises, and they imply that you will get magic if you just buy a blockchain system. This is, of course, not the case. I think my favorite one of these is one, like you may vaguely have heard of Estonia's blockchain revolution, where everything in Estonia, the e-country, is all blockchain and it's fabulous. And they have, and apparently this is good news for cryptocurrency as well for some reason. So what they've got is they've got a piece of software called KSI Blockchain made by a company called GuardTime. And it's not a blockchain. It's literally just the tamper-proof ledger. They store timestamps in it. That's all it is. And they have blatantly said, yeah, we're just using the word blockchain because it's popular. When the shine goes off blockchain, we'll change the name to something else because it's good software and we're proud of it. And I can't even say they're wrong. You know, they've done great promotionally out of it. But that's an example of that blockchain isn't even a specific technology. And you get ones that don't quite have that sort of Merkle tree ledger as I described in the first part, but they're still selling them in the blockchain market. You have some people who sort of do a sort of reverse marketing thing, like R3 is one. They pitch mostly to banks. They sell a sort of distributed ledger product. They say, this is not a blockchain, and it's not magical. And it's like they're selling realism in a market full of fog, which is quite clever. They're having variable success with it, but, you know, they're selling a real thing, so that's nice. So, yeah. It's there's good bits that are not new, and the new bits tend to be weird and silly. And basically, the only actual use case I've seen for the full-on blockchain is cryptocurrency, and I don't think that's a good use case for other reasons.
So we've got a question here, which, in the interests of honest declaration, I will also answer. Did the author, David, ever buy any cryptocurrency? Why did he buy it? Does he still own it? If yes, why? If no, did he sell it? So I just, in the personal disclosure, yeah, I bought 3 types, Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Litecoin, because if I wanted to speak on them, I felt I ought to have some. They're worth about 50% of what I bought them for. And should they ever come up, I will sell them. So, David. And you?
Oh, I mean, me, I have never bought a cryptocurrency. I always thought this was terrible. I once had, I installed Dogecoin on my computer, and I got 6 Dogecoins from one of the Dogecoin faucets, where they just give some away to get people started. And, you know, I lost those when I reformatted the laptop they were on, and I didn't bother with it. If I'd held on to them, by December last year, they could have been worth 6 cents. So, yeah, I hold no cryptocurrency. I have no interest in any cryptocurrency or blockchain company of any sort. But, yes, so I've tried to educate myself as much as I can on it without actually sort of diving into the sewer myself personally. Although, I mean, I can't say it's wrong to. I mean, certainly it's extremely educational to go on Coinbase, buy 10 quid of Ethereum, watch it go up and down and up and down and down and down, and you'll learn things you'd never learn any other way, as
Absolutely.
Ray has.
Yes. And to some extent, I feel that in my role in NewMR and this new tech, I probably have to play a little bit. And there's a fair number of times I bought software that didn't work out, and this would be one of those. We've got an interesting question here, perhaps apply some cross-thinking to it. Can blockchain be applied to address cross-border contraband of goods? So I guess the point here is every product could be uniquely identified, and it could be entered on a ledger. I guess you're probably then assuming that every criminal down the line will register it, and when they sell it in the pub or whatever.
It's so the problem there is what you really got. A lot of problems where people say we could use a blockchain for this. It's actually a problem with their data being bad. Where they have bad data, they have not the right data, they have bad data formats and so on. And you see a blockchain solution, and then you realize the actual good bit is sorting out your data, cleaning it up, sorting out your formats and so on. So it turns out that actually blockchain is an excellent excuse to get funding for this. Now that sounds cynical, but they literally did this in some of the Walmart trials. There's a book coming out next month, Cryptocurrencies and Blockchains by Quinn DuPont. It's an academic survey of blockchainy stuff, and it's going to be an excellent book. And he actually covered one Walmart mango supply chain trial, which they didn't go ahead with, but he spoke to the people on the ground doing the stuff. They were enormously pleased because they could finally get funding to digitize a pile of stuff that hadn't been digitized before. So, yeah, that, I suppose that's a use case. But the other problem is that, yeah, if your threat model is fraud, it turns out crooks are creative. And also, if they'll lie on paper, they'll lie entering data into a blockchain. So if you actually want to clean up the supply chain case, if your threat model is fraud, you're still going to need human inspectors who know the scams to go out to your suppliers and have a look. I know that this has been a problem for some blockchain supply chain marketers in the UK, like Provenance is one. I spoke to some of their prospective customers who turned them down. They said, look, this is great software. It solves a bit of our problem, but it doesn't really solve our problem. Because, you know, having the data is good, and that might make the Walmart trial or the Maersk trial work out, even if there's no reason to do it on a blockchain. Maybe they'll end up with a good system that happens to have a blockchain at the back of it, but it still wouldn't be a reason to adopt the blockchain. The actual issue is getting your data in order. And if your threat model is fraud, then you're going to need people who actually inspect what's going on and know the scams and know the new scams as they came along, because computer programs aren't very creative.
We've got a short question here, David. Do you run any courses, or do you know anybody who does run any courses on this topic? No, I have considered putting one together, but what I end up doing is doing talks like this. So that's fine. I don't know. There are lots of courses on blockchain, and most of them are absolutely terrible. They're very wide-eyed, and they're basically funded by blockchain and cryptocurrency companies to try to legitimize their business, and they're really not very good. I won't name names, but I've yet to see one that's actually like any good. There's a big problem, actually. This has been spoken of. The Financial Times has run a few articles on this. We have cryptocurrency companies funding academic research units or academic reports that turn out to be sales pieces for their cryptocurrency, and it's not so good. Right. So you've got to really beware. Absolutely. So we've got a question here. Can you perhaps cover the difference between public blockchains like Ethereum and private permission-based ones like Hyperledger? Right. So the public ones like Bitcoin and Ethereum, the whole idea is decentralization. Nobody runs this thing. It's just a thing that exists out there. So one, that isn't quite true because they re-centralize after a while. And also, they tend to do this using proof-of-work mining, which I won't explain. But basically, they waste a lot of electricity, and computers try to guess numbers to reverse a hash, and they make lots and lots of guesses, millions and billions and sextillions every second, and then one of them shouts, "Number wang," and they win the Bitcoins. That's actually how Bitcoin mining works. So this ends up using 0.1% of all the electricity in the world, and it's not good. So Ethereum is a bit smaller, so it doesn't waste as much electricity, but is literally wasted on something, on calculations you could run on an iPhone for the whole network, because the calculation, doing the transactions is easy. It's guessing numbers that's artificially difficult. So when people tried promoting blockchains to business, they went, yeah, that's pretty stupid, actually, isn't it? Let's not do that. So they decided, let's not do the stupid thing, which is a little used technique. So instead, they came up with other ways of trying to administer who gets to calculate
the next transaction load. So because they know all participants on a private blockchain, you know all the participants because you invited them. But they basically have variance on just taking turns. Sometimes you can get this in the cryptocurrency area. Ripple, XRP currency run by Ripple Labs. They claim we don't run it, other people do it. They have various 22 calculating nodes that can process transactions on Ripple, and Ripple's very fast. It doesn't burn electricity the way that Bitcoin does, but Ripple Labs control who gets to have a node, so it's functionally centralized. They still run it. For private blockchains like Hyperledger, at this point we're getting to, there's all sorts of different things: proof of elapsed time, proof of authority, proof of this, blah. They're all variants on just taking turns, because you know all the participants. And eventually you'll decide, maybe we should just calculate them centrally, and it'll be a lot more efficient. So at that point, the blockchain approaches being a distributed data store that is extremely robust, because everyone's got a whole copy of the whole thing. Good. That's a form of clustered database. So yeah, at this point, as I said, it becomes an IT architecture question. What is the appropriate structure for our back-end system? Should we use a blockchain, or should we use Oracle or Postgres or something? And at this point, blockchain has no advantage and tends towards having disadvantages. As I said, people are putting these systems into place anyway, usually because they want to promote blockchain, and it's quite possible the systems will actually work okay. The World Food Program system, I wouldn't even say they should rip Ethereum out, even though it's not achieving anything in particular, because it's a working system. You don't mess with a working system. So, but it wouldn't be an example to emulate. So yeah, private blockchains take away the silly bit, which is the proof of work, proof of waste mining, and replace it with just taking turns, and then try to claim, the magical promises bit, all the magical effects that Bitcoin tried to claim. And it delivers them, except in a way that's completely centralized when you come down to it, because there's someone who runs the thing and can be told.
Okay, this is going to have to be the final question, although we do have some more flowing through. And in fact, this is a summary of 2 or 3 questions, which is very much in the market research zone. So imagine that somebody creates a centralized database of everybody who wants to take part in surveys. So I want to take part in surveys. I go to this registration company. I say that I'm male, I'm 60 plus, I live in Nottingham, and all of that information gets hashed, and I'm given an ID. And then I want to do a survey with any of the leading survey companies. I answer their questions. I say that I'm male, I'm living in Nottingham, and I give them my ID. And they can then send that ID back to the centralized database company to say, is this person really over 60 living in Nottingham? The argument being that at present, there are people who will be 60 one day, 50 the next day, male one day, female the next day, in order to do surveys. So the risk case is fraud. And what the people who are proposing this are saying is, could that be a viable use? That when people want to do surveys, they sign up to this ledger, and everybody else can just check their credentials against the ledger without having access to any of their data.
Well, I suppose they could. This is what you're describing there is pretty much what people market with blockchains, except you change the word blockchain to central database. But you'll note how the actual thing you've described doesn't change, and any personal data issues you're describing don't change. The main difference you would have is that if it was all blockchain based, you'd have permanent records of people's data flowing around. Whereas with a centralized database of the conventional sort, you could redact it if it was necessary. And you'd know exactly who was doing what with it and how it was being distributed. Now, the obvious thing that springs to mind is you have the risk that that if someone got 2 or 3 of those personal data records, they could build up a shadow profile of someone, and eventually they'll work out who it is, or they'll pretend they don't know who it is, or whatever. But at that point, of course, this is when you have to talk to a lawyer who understands data protection issues. But if you were doing this sort of system, you'd probably have done that already. So the only question is central database or blockchain. I'd do that with a central database because you can redact it, is sort of my answer to that one. Though there are people selling blockchain-based systems with literally that as the sales pitch, and saying that somehow blockchain will insulate you from any possible data protection consequences. It won't, fundamentally, and it may make them worse.
Super. Okay, so if anybody would like to find out more, I would suggest seeking out David either through Twitter. Of course, read other sources.
Totally.
Yeah, there are some interesting articles in The Economist. And that, I don't know if you saw The Economist article, David, recently, but I thought it was quite balanced. It talked about negatives and positives. It mostly came out, as you and I have done, on the negatives. But it does have some other pieces. Forbes has certainly got some stuff. Wired has got some stuff.
I would beware of Forbes, because a lot of the stuff in Forbes is not magazine articles, it's contributor blogs.
Yeah,
if you see a Forbes article and it says up the top contributor, that means it's just some guy writing a blog. It might be great. Francis Coppola's blogs are awesome, for example. Others are not so great. If it says Forbes staff or from the print edition, then it's the proper magazine.
That's a good tip, but of course it's a good tip about any of these online magazines.
Oh, yeah.
Magazines and the blogs that I write and you write. Every time you need to know who's writing it. And one of the strong points about The Economist is that they don't have the author's name, because everything is written with the authority of The Economist. They stand behind everything they write, which is
yeah. By the way, I was in that Economist piece, and I was one of the sources for it. I can tell you that I've got like 2 or 3 lines quoted, but those lines were based on a 3-hour interview and a lot of back and forth email clarifying details. So when The Economist's wrong, at least you know they've done their homework and they're mostly right. So that's a pretty good piece that they worked hard on.
Okay, David, thank you so much for that.